The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as Colonel Sarah Mitchell walked through the equipment depot. She had been serving for 23 years, and today felt like any other routine inspection. The air was crisp, carrying the familiar scent of gun oil and metal that had become second nature to her over the decades. Sarah's boots clicked against the concrete floor as she moved between rows of carefully organized weapons. Her clipboard held the standard checklist she had completed hundreds of times before. Each rifle, each scope, each piece of equipment had to be accounted for and inspected. It was tedious work, but Sarah understood the importance of maintaining perfect records. She approached the section where the specialized sniper rifles were stored. These weren't ordinary weapons. The CheyTac M200 rifles represented some of the most advanced long-range precision equipment in the military arsenal. Each one was worth more than most people's cars and required meticulous care. As she reached for the first rifle in the rack, Sarah noticed something unusual. The weapon felt different somehow, heavier with an invisible weight that seemed to press against her consciousness. She lifted the CheyTac M200 carefully, following standard protocol for handling such valuable equipment. The rifle was beautiful in its deadly precision. The black finish gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and every component spoke of engineering excellence. Sarah had handled these weapons countless times during her career, training soldiers in their proper use and maintenance. She knew every inch of their construction. But today something was different. As she began her inspection, checking the scope mounts and running her fingers along the barrel, she felt an odd sensation. It was as if the weapon itself was trying to tell her something. The metal seemed to hold secrets, stories that went beyond the technical specifications in her manual. Sarah shook her head, dismissing the strange feeling as fatigue. She had been working long hours recently, preparing for the upcoming training exercises. Perhaps she was simply more tired than she realized. She continued her inspection, noting the serial numbers and checking each component against her list. The scope was a work of art, capable of magnifying targets at impossible distances. Sarah peered through it briefly, adjusting the focus and checking for any signs of damage or wear. Everything appeared to be in perfect condition, exactly as it should be for equipment of this caliber. She was about to move on to the next rifle when something caught her eye. There, etched discreetly into the metal near the trigger guard, were small marks that she had never noticed before. They weren't part of the manufacturer's markings or military inventory numbers. These looked different, more personal somehow. Sarah leaned closer, squinting to make out the details. The marks appeared to be tally marks, tiny scratches in the metal that someone had carefully carved. Her heart began to beat a little faster as she realized what she might be looking at. In military culture, such marks often represented something very specific and very serious. She counted the marks carefully. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then another group. Then another. The pattern continued along a small section of the weapon, hidden where only someone conducting a very thorough inspection would notice them. Sarah's mouth went dry as she continued counting. The realization hit her like a physical blow. These weren't random scratches or maintenance marks. These were kill marks, each one representing a successful shot, a life taken at an extraordinary distance. The precision required for such shots was legendary among military marksmen, the stuff of whispered stories and hushed reverence. Sarah's hands began to tremble slightly as she held the rifle. She had spent her entire career around weapons and soldiers, but she had never held something that carried such a tangible record of its deadly purpose. The weight of the rifle seemed to increase with each mark she counted, as if the metal itself was absorbing the gravity of its history. She looked around the empty depot, suddenly feeling very alone with this discovery. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the familiar sounds of the base seemed distant and muffled. Sarah realized she was holding not just a weapon, but a piece of military history, a tool that had been wielded by someone with extraordinary skill and deadly precision. The implications began to sink in. Someone had used this exact rifle to take lives at distances that most people couldn't even imagine. The technology and skill required for such shots was the stuff of legend among military snipers. Sarah had heard stories, of course, but she had never been this close to the actual evidence. Her training told her to continue with the inspection, to note any irregularities and move on to the next item on her checklist. But something deeper, some instinct developed over decades of military service, told her that this discovery was significant. This wasn't just another piece of equipment. This rifle had a story to tell. Sarah set the rifle down with extraordinary care, her mind racing with questions that demanded answers. She pulled out her smartphone and photographed the markings, making sure to capture every detail. The tiny scratches seemed to mock her with their simplicity, such small marks representing such enormous consequences. Walking quickly to her office, Sarah's footsteps echoed through the empty corridors. The base was still quiet in the early morning hours, most personnel not yet arrived for duty. This gave her time to think, to process what she had discovered without interruption or explanation. Once seated at her desk, Sarah opened her computer and began searching through military databases. She needed to trace the history of this particular rifle, to understand where it had been and who had used it. The serial number would tell her everything, but she had to be careful about how she conducted her investigation. The weapon's digital record showed a complex history. It had been deployed to several conflict zones over the past decade, moving between different units and operators. Sarah's security clearance allowed her access to most of the information, but some details remained classified above her level. What she could see was troubling and fascinating in equal measure. The rifle had been assigned to specialized units, the kind that operated in situations where extreme precision was not just preferred, but absolutely necessary. These were the units that took on missions where failure meant not just military defeat, but potential international incidents. Sarah found references to operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other locations that were still classified. The rifle had been in the hands of some of the military's most elite marksmen, soldiers whose names she recognized from legendary stories told in hushed tones among military personnel. As she dug deeper into the records, Sarah began to piece together a timeline. The weapon had seen action in some of the most dangerous and complex operations of the past decade. Each deployment represented months or years in hostile territory, where the difference between success and failure was often measured in millimeters at distances of over a mile. The technical specifications of the CheyTac M200 were impressive enough on paper. Capable of accurate shots at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, the rifle represented the pinnacle of long-range precision technology. But seeing evidence of its actual use in combat conditions was something entirely different. Sarah pulled up ballistics data and range calculations. A shot at 2,850 meters was beyond extraordinary. It was the kind of distance that required not just exceptional skill, but perfect conditions, advanced calculations, and a level of patience that few people possessed. The bullet would be in flight for several seconds, during which wind, temperature, humidity, and countless other factors could affect its trajectory. She found herself calculating the technical requirements for such a shot. The bullet drop alone would be measured in dozens of feet. The shooter would have to account for the Earth's rotation, the Coriolis effect that could deflect a bullet by several inches at such extreme ranges. It was as much science as marksmanship. The more Sarah researched, the more impressed and disturbed she became. Each mark on that rifle represented not just a successful shot, but a demonstration of skill that bordered on the superhuman. The mental discipline required to make such shots under combat conditions was something she could barely comprehend. She began cross-referencing the rifle's deployment history with known military operations. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of missions that had never made the news. Operations conducted in the shadows where success was measured not in territory gained, but in threats eliminated before they could materialize. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her assistant, reminding her of the day's scheduled meetings. She looked at the clock and realized she had been researching for over 2 hours. The base was now fully operational, with personnel arriving and beginning their daily routines. But Sarah couldn't concentrate on routine tasks. The discovery in the weapons depot had opened a door to a world she had known existed, but never directly encountered. She was looking at evidence of the military's most secretive and precise operations, the kind that required operators with skills that seemed almost mythical. She printed out some of the technical data and weapon specifications, being careful to include only information that was already within her clearance level. The classified details would have to remain in the digital realm, but she needed something tangible to help her understand what she had discovered. As Sarah prepared for her first meeting of the day, she realized that her routine inspection had uncovered something far more significant than a simple inventory discrepancy. She was now connected to stories of extraordinary skill and deadly precision, operations that had shaped recent military history in ways the public would never know. The weight of this knowledge settled on her shoulders as she locked her office and headed to the conference room. She carried with her not just the memory of those tiny marks on cold metal, but the growing understanding that she had stumbled upon evidence of some of the most remarkable and lethal marksmanship in modern military history. Sarah knew she needed to learn more, but she also understood that her investigation would have to be conducted carefully. The world of elite military snipers was one of secrecy and shadows, where stories were rarely told, and legends were built on whispered rumors rather than official records. 3 days after her discovery, Sarah found herself in the archives section of the base surrounded by boxes of mission reports and personnel files. Her official duties had taken a back seat to her unofficial investigation. She had used her position and clearance to access records that might shed light on the rifle's history and its previous operators. The breakthrough came when she cross-referenced deployment dates with personnel assignments. A name kept appearing in connection with the rifle's most significant deployments. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, a sniper with the 75th Ranger Regiment who had served multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Sarah pulled Chen's file and began reading. The man's service record was extraordinary. Multiple commendations, expert marksmanship qualifications that exceeded standard requirements, and a series of successful missions that had earned him recognition among the military's elite sniper community. What struck Sarah most was not just Chen's skill, but his background. He had grown up in rural Montana, learning to hunt from his grandfather at an early age. His natural talent with rifles had been evident from childhood, but it was his military training that had refined those skills into something approaching artistry. The file contained photographs of Chen, showing a quiet, intense man with dark eyes that seemed to see everything. His instructor's comments praised not just his marksmanship, but his patience, his ability to remain motionless for hours, and his mathematical precision in calculating shots under the most challenging conditions. Sarah discovered that Chen had been deployed with the rifle during a particularly dangerous mission in Afghanistan's Helmand province. The operation, classified as Operation Silent Thunder, had involved eliminating high-value targets who were coordinating attacks against coalition forces from seemingly impossible distances. The mission reports, heavily redacted but still revealing, described encounters where enemy combatants had established positions on mountainsides, believing themselves safe from conventional weapons due to the extreme range. Chen and his spotter had been tasked with proving them wrong. Reading between the lines of the official reports, Sarah began to understand the nature of Chen's work. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a problem solver who used mathematics, physics, and extraordinary skill to eliminate threats that conventional forces couldn't reach. Each shot required hours of preparation, careful observation of conditions, and calculations that had to be perfect. The 2,150-meter shot that had left its mark on the rifle had occurred during a mission to protect a convoy of humanitarian aid workers. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves on a ridge that commanded the only safe route through a valley. Traditional military response would have required significant resources and time, during which the aid workers remained in danger. Chen had studied the position for 3 days, calculating wind patterns, temperature variations, and the precise trajectory needed to reach the target. The shot, when it finally came, had been the result of patience, preparation, and skill that few people in the world possessed. Sarah found herself fascinated by the technical aspects of Chen's work. The ballistics calculations alone were incredibly complex. At 2,850 meters, a bullet would drop more than 30 feet from its initial trajectory. Wind could push it several feet in any direction. The shooter had to account for altitude, humidity, temperature, and even the Earth's rotation. But beyond the technical skill, Sarah was impressed by the mental discipline required. Chen's missions often involved waiting for days in hostile territory, remaining perfectly still while observing enemy positions, waiting for the perfect moment when all conditions aligned for a successful shot. The psychological profile in Chen's file revealed a man who approached his deadly work with a calm professionalism that was both admirable and slightly unsettling. He showed no signs of the emotional trauma that often affected soldiers in combat roles. Instead, he seemed to view each mission as a complex puzzle to be solved with precision and patience. Sarah learned that Chen had requested the specific CheyTac M200 for his final deployment. He had worked with the rifle extensively during training and had developed an almost intimate knowledge of its characteristics. Every weapon, even of the same model, had unique traits that affected accuracy, and Chen had learned to compensate for this particular rifle's specific tendencies. The relationship between a sniper and his rifle was something Sarah was beginning to understand. It wasn't just a tool. It was a partner in the deadly precise work that these soldiers performed. Chen had customized various aspects of the weapon, making minor adjustments that improved its performance under the specific conditions he faced. As Sarah continued reading, she discovered that Chen's tour had ended abruptly. He had been wounded during a mission and evacuated for medical treatment. The rifle had been returned to the armory while he recovered, but Chen had never returned to active duty. He had been medically retired due to injuries sustained in combat. The final entry in Chen's file indicated that he had been awarded several medals for his service, including recognition for actions that remained classified. His commanding officer's recommendation spoke of a soldier who had performed his duties with exceptional skill and unwavering dedication. Sarah realized she was looking at the career of one of the military's most effective operators, a man whose work had likely saved countless lives through his ability to eliminate threats from impossible distances. The marks on the rifle represented not just successful shots but missions completed, lives saved, and dangers neutralized through the application of extraordinary skill and deadly precision. After her conversation with Rodriguez, Sarah found herself changed by the knowledge she now carried. The marked rifle had returned to its rack in the weapons depot, but she could no longer see it as just another piece of equipment. Every time she walked through that section, she was reminded of the extraordinary events that weapon had witnessed. Sarah began researching why Chen's record-breaking shot had never been publicly acknowledged. What she discovered was a complex web of operational security, classified missions, and the military's need to protect both methods and personnel. The shot that had saved lives and altered the course of operations in an entire region remained buried in classified files. The official records showed that the mission had been successful, but the details of how that success was achieved were locked away at classification levels that few people would ever access. Chen's achievement existed in the shadowy world of special operations, where extraordinary feats were often hidden to protect future capabilities. Sarah learned that announcing such a shot would have revealed too much about military capabilities, equipment specifications, and operational methods. The enemy would have learned valuable information about the range and precision of American sniper teams, potentially compromising future missions and putting other soldiers at risk. She also discovered that Chen himself had requested that his achievement remain classified. Through military channels, Sarah found a brief statement Chen had made during his debriefing, where he emphasized that publicizing the shot would serve no tactical purpose and might endanger other operators working in similar conditions. This level of humility and professionalism impressed Sarah even more than the technical achievement itself. Chen had accomplished something that would have made him famous in military circles, yet he chose to keep it secret for the greater good of military operations and the safety of his fellow soldiers. Sarah began to understand the burden that soldiers like Chen carried. They performed extraordinary feats under the most challenging conditions, often saving lives and completing crucial missions, but their achievements remained hidden from public recognition. The psychological weight of such secrecy was something she had never fully appreciated. Through her research, Sarah learned that Chen's injury during his final mission had been more serious than initially indicated in his file. He had been wounded while providing overwatch for an extraction operation, continuing to engage enemy targets even after being hit. His dedication to mission completion had likely saved the lives of the team he was protecting. The medical reports, which Sarah accessed through proper channels, revealed that Chen had suffered nerve damage that ended his career as a precision marksman. The injury wasn't immediately life-threatening, but it had affected the fine motor control necessary for the extraordinary accuracy that had defined his military service. Sarah found herself wondering about Chen's transition to civilian life. How did someone with such specialized skills adapt to a world where their unique talents were no longer needed? The psychological challenges faced by retired special operations personnel were well documented, but Chen's situation seemed particularly complex. She discovered that Chen had settled in a small town in Montana, returning to the rural environment where his marksmanship journey had begun. He had used his military benefits to purchase a small ranch, where he lived quietly and avoided drawing attention to his military background. Local records showed that Chen had occasionally provided marksmanship instruction to law enforcement agencies, sharing his knowledge in ways that continued to serve his community. But he had consistently declined interviews, book deals, and speaking engagements that would have brought his military achievements to public attention. Sarah realized that Chen's story represented something larger than individual achievement. It was a testament to the dedication and sacrifice of military personnel who performed extraordinary service without expectation of recognition or reward. Their motivation came from duty, professionalism, and commitment to protecting others. The marked rifle in her depot represented not just technical achievement, but moral courage. Each mark told a story of split-second decisions made under pressure, of lives saved through precise action, of soldiers who carried the weight of their deadly skills with honor and humility. Sarah began to see her own role differently. As someone responsible for maintaining and tracking these weapons, she was connected to stories of service and sacrifice that most people would never know. The equipment in her care had been tools in the hands of extraordinary individuals who had shaped history through their actions. She also understood why the military's most elite operators often struggled with retirement. The transition from a world where their skills had life and death importance to civilian life where those same skills were largely irrelevant created psychological challenges that were difficult for outsiders to understand. The secrecy surrounding Chen's achievement also highlighted the complex relationship between military effectiveness and public knowledge. While democratic societies valued transparency, operational effectiveness sometimes required that extraordinary achievements remain hidden to protect future capabilities and personnel. Sarah found herself respecting Chen even more for his choice to remain silent about his accomplishments. In a culture that often celebrated individual achievement and sought recognition for extraordinary feats, Chen had chosen the harder path of anonymous service to a greater cause. As she prepared to complete her investigation and return to her regular duties, Sarah carried with her a deeper appreciation for the hidden heroes who served in the shadows. Their stories might never be told, but their service continued to protect and defend in ways that the public might never fully understand or appreciate. 6 months after her discovery, Sarah found herself standing once again in front of the weapons rack, holding the same CheyTac M200 that had started her journey into the hidden world of military precision. But now the rifle carried additional weight beyond its physical mass. It held the weight of knowledge, of understanding, of connection to extraordinary service that most people would never comprehend. Sarah had completed her investigation quietly and professionally, documenting her findings in reports that would likely remain buried in classified files for decades. She had learned the story behind the marks, understood the achievement they represented, and gained insight into the complex world of military special operations. The rifle would soon be transferred to a different unit, continuing its service in the hands of other skilled operators. Sarah had ensured that its maintenance records were complete and accurate, but she had made no official mention of the kill marks or their significance. Some stories she had learned were meant to remain hidden, but Sarah had made one unauthorized decision. Using her administrative access and knowledge of military protocols, she had quietly arranged for Chen to be informed about the location of his former rifle. It wasn't proper procedure, and it could have resulted in disciplinary action if discovered. But Sarah felt that the man who had achieved something extraordinary deserved to know that his weapon was being properly cared for. To her surprise, Chen had responded through official channels requesting permission to visit the base. His letter, processed through military protocol, was simple and professional, asking only for the opportunity to see the rifle one final time before it was transferred to active duty. The meeting had been arranged for a quiet afternoon when the depot was nearly empty. Sarah had been waiting when Chen arrived, accompanied by a current military escort as required by security protocols. The man who entered the depot bore little resemblance to the intense soldier she had seen in military photographs. Chen was shorter than Sarah had expected, with graying hair and a slight limp that spoke of his combat injuries. But his eyes still held the same intensity she had seen in his military photos. The gaze of someone who had trained himself to see and understand details that others missed. When Chen approached the rifle, his demeanor changed subtly. He didn't touch the weapon immediately, instead studying it from several angles as if reacquainting himself with an old friend. When he finally lifted the CheyTac M200, his hands moved with practiced familiarity, checking the action and examining the scope with professional thoroughness. "She's been well maintained," Chen said quietly, his first words since entering the depot. "Thank you for taking care of her." Sarah watched as Chen found the small marks near the trigger guard, running his finger gently over scratches that represented some of the most remarkable marksmanship in military history. His expression remained neutral, but she could see the memories playing behind his eyes. "I heard you know about the 2008 50-meter shot," Chen said without looking up from the rifle. "Rodriguez told me someone had been asking questions." Sarah confirmed that she had spoken with his former spotter and had researched the mission records available to her clearance level. She expressed her admiration for the achievement and her respect for his service, but Chen seemed uncomfortable with the praise. "It wasn't just me," Chen explained. "Rodriguez was essential for that shot. The intelligence people who identified the target, the support teams who got us into position, the commanders who gave us the mission. Individual achievements in the military are usually team efforts that get credited to one person." This humility, Sarah realized, was characteristic of the elite operators she had learned about during her investigation. They understood that their extraordinary individual skills were meaningless without the support, training and teamwork that made their missions possible. Chen spent nearly an hour with the rifle, checking its condition and making minor adjustments that only someone with his level of expertise would notice. He spoke briefly about its characteristics, explaining how he had learned to compensate for its specific traits during their time together in combat. "This rifle saved a lot of lives," Chen said as he prepared to leave. "I hope whoever gets it next understands that it's not just about the technology. It's about responsibility, patience, and making every shot count." Before departing, Chen thanked Sarah for her discretion in handling the discovery of the kill marks. He explained that the secrecy surrounding his achievements wasn't just about operational security, but about his own desire to leave his military service in the past and build a new life as a civilian. After Chen left, Sarah returned the rifle to its rack with a deeper understanding of the responsibility she carried as its temporary custodian. The weapon would soon be deployed with new operators who might never know about its remarkable history, but would benefit from its proven reliability and precision. Sarah had learned that the most extraordinary achievements often remained hidden, known only to the small group of people directly involved. The public might never hear about the 2008 50-meter shot that had saved lives and changed the course of operations in a remote Afghan valley, but its impact had rippled through military and civilian communities in ways that might never be fully understood. In the weeks that followed, Sarah found herself viewing her work differently. Every weapon, every piece of equipment in her care might have similar stories, hidden histories of service and sacrifice that would remain classified for decades. Her role as their guardian carried responsibilities that extended far beyond simple inventory management. The marked rifle was eventually transferred to its new unit, carrying with it the potential for new stories, new achievements, new service in the hands of the next generation of military marksmen. Sarah's investigation had ended, but her understanding of the hidden world of military service would continue to influence how she approached her duties for the rest of her career. She never spoke publicly about what she had learned, honoring the tradition of silence that protected both operational security and the privacy of the extraordinary individuals who served in the shadows. But she carried with her the knowledge that ordinary-looking equipment could hide extraordinary stories, and that the true heroes of military service often preferred anonymity to recognition. Sarah's investigation led her to Sergeant First Class David Rodriguez, Chen's former spotter, and the only person who had witnessed the legendary 2,150-meter shot firsthand. Rodriguez had remained in service and was currently stationed at Fort Bragg, but Sarah managed to arrange a secure video call through official channels. Rodriguez appeared on her screen as a weathered man in his 40s, with the intense gaze common among soldiers who had seen extensive combat. When Sarah explained her discovery of the marked rifle, Rodriguez's expression changed from professional courtesy to something approaching reverence. "You found Marcus's rifle," Rodriguez said quietly. "I wondered what happened to that weapon. That CheyTac was like an extension of his body. I've never seen anyone shoot like that man could shoot." Rodriguez began to describe the mission that had produced the record-breaking shot. They had been deployed to a remote valley in Afghanistan, where Taliban fighters had established a position that was devastating coalition patrols. The enemy had chosen their location perfectly, with clear sight lines over the only route through the area and enough distance to make conventional weapons ineffective. The brass wanted to call in an airstrike, Rodriguez explained, but there were civilian villages nearby, and intelligence suggested the Taliban were using human shields. Marcus studied the situation for 2 days before proposing his solution. The target was a single Taliban commander who was coordinating attacks from a rocky outcrop on a mountain ridge. Intelligence indicated that eliminating this individual would disrupt the entire operation and allow safe passage for coalition forces and humanitarian convoys. Rodriguez described how Chen had spent hours calculating the shot. The distance was beyond anything he had attempted before, pushing the limits of both the rifle and his own capabilities. The bullet would be in flight for over 4 seconds, during which countless variables could affect its trajectory. Marcus set up in a position that gave him a clear line of sight, but we were so far away that even through the scope, the target looked like a dot, Rodriguez continued. He spent an entire day just observing, noting wind patterns, temperature changes, how the heat affected visibility. The mathematics involved were staggering. Chen had to calculate bullet drop, wind drift, the Coriolis effect, and atmospheric conditions. He used weather instruments, ballistic software, and years of experience to develop a firing solution that existed at the very edge of possibility. Rodriguez explained that Chen had also studied the target's behavior patterns. The Taliban commander appeared at the same position each morning to observe the valley and coordinate with his fighters. Chen needed to predict not just where the target would be, but exactly when he would be stationary long enough for the shot to reach him. The morning of the shot, conditions were as perfect as they were going to get, Rodriguez recalled. Light wind, good visibility, stable temperature. Marcus made final adjustments to his scope and settled into position about an hour before the target usually appeared. The waiting was perhaps the most difficult part. Chen had to remain perfectly motionless while maintaining focus on a target that was barely visible even through his high-powered scope. Any movement, any change in his breathing or heart rate could affect the shot's accuracy by several feet at that distance. When the target finally appeared, Chen had only a few minutes to make his decision. The Taliban commander was known to be cautious, rarely staying in one position for long. Through his scope, Chen could see the figure moving around the rocky outcrop, occasionally pausing to survey the valley below. Marcus tracked him for about 3 minutes, Rodriguez said. I was watching through my own scope, calling out adjustments for wind and distance. When the target stopped in an exposed position, Marcus had maybe 30 seconds to take the shot. The actual moment of the shot was anticlimactic in its simplicity. Chen made a final microscopic adjustment to his scope, controlled his breathing, and squeezed the trigger with the gentle pressure that had become second nature through thousands of hours of training. The bullet left the rifle at over 3,000 feet per second, beginning a journey that would take it through varying air densities, crosswinds, and gravitational effects that Chen had calculated to the millimeter. For 4.5 seconds, the success or failure of the mission depended on physics, mathematics, and the precision of Chen's calculations. Rodriguez described watching through his scope as the bullet reached its target. At that distance, even with magnification, the impact was barely visible. But within minutes, intelligence confirmed that the Taliban commander had been eliminated, and enemy activity in the valley ceased almost immediately. Marcus just looked at me and nodded, Rodriguez remembered. No celebration, no emotion. He treated it like any other successful shot, but I knew we had just witnessed something extraordinary. That distance, those conditions, the importance of the target, it was the kind of shot that snipers talk about in whispers. The aftermath had been swift and decisive. Coalition forces were able to move through the valley safely. Humanitarian aid reached villages that had been cut off for weeks, and the Taliban's operational capability in the region was significantly reduced. Rodriguez explained that Chen had insisted on confirming the shot's distance using GPS, measurements, and range-finding equipment. When the calculation came back at 2,147 meters, later refined to 2,150 meters, both men understood they had achieved something that would likely never be repeated. Marcus made that mark on his rifle that night, Rodriguez concluded. One small scratch to represent the longest confirmed kill shot in military history. But he never talked about it, never boasted. To him, it was just another problem solved. Another mission completed. Sarah realized she was listening to the description of one of the most remarkable feats of marksmanship in modern warfare. A shot that had required not just extraordinary skill, but perfect conditions, advanced technology, and a level of mental discipline that few people possessed.